A young woman with grease-stained coveralls kneels beside a disabled M1 Abrams tank in the scorching Nevada desert, her weathered hands expertly diagnosing an engine problem that has stumped 3 trained military mechanics, while a distinguished Army general watches in stunned silence from across the motor pool. For 22 years, General Robert Hayes has searched military databases, veterans' hospitals, and missing persons reports for any trace of Staff Sergeant Daniel Rivera, decorated combat engineer who vanished without explanation after returning from his 3rd deployment to Afghanistan. Now, as he observes this civilian contractor's uncanny ability to understand complex military machinery and notices the faded Army tattoo barely visible beneath her rolled-up sleeve, the general must decide whether to ask the question that could shatter carefully constructed walls of protection around a secret that has haunted 2 families for over 2 decades. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary story of hidden connections and long-buried truths, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and if you believe some people are destined to find each other despite impossible odds. If this story already has you intrigued, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's video reveals an even more incredible twist about military families, separated by circumstances beyond their control. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Nellis Air Force Base as Maya Rodriguez wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving another streak of engine oil across her already dirt-stained face. At 24, she had earned a reputation as one of the most skilled civilian mechanics contracted to work on military vehicles, a expertise that seemed to flow through her veins like an inherited language she had never been formally taught. Her small frame belied the strength in her arms as she maneuvered heavy engine components with the precision of someone who understood machinery not just intellectually, but instinctively. The massive M1 Abrams tank before her had been declared beyond field repair by 3 different military mechanics over the past week. Its sophisticated turbine engine had developed what the technical manuals classified as a catastrophic failure in the fuel delivery system, a problem that typically required complete engine replacement and weeks of downtime. For a training unit preparing for deployment, such delays could mean the difference between proper preparation and sending soldiers into combat with inadequate equipment familiarity. Maya had been called in as a last resort, her unconventional background making her both an asset and an anomaly in the structured world of military operations. Unlike the formally trained mechanics who approached problems through standardized procedures and technical manuals, Maya possessed an intuitive understanding of how machines communicated their distress. She could diagnose issues by sound, by vibration, by the subtle ways that metal stressed under improper operation. Her reputation had spread through word of mouth among maintenance crews across multiple bases. Vehicles that others had written off as total losses somehow came back to life under her careful attention. Complex hydraulic systems that had baffled engineers revealed their secrets to her patient investigation. Electronic systems that seemed hopelessly corrupted responded to her methodical troubleshooting approach. What made Maya's expertise particularly remarkable was its apparent spontaneity. She had never served in the military, had never attended formal technical training for heavy machinery, and had grown up on a small farm in rural New Mexico, where the most complex equipment was an aging tractor and a temperamental irrigation pump. Yet when she encountered military vehicles, something clicked into place, as if she were remembering rather than learning. The mystery deepened when considering her family background. Her mother, Carmen Rodriguez, had raised Maya alone after her father disappeared when Maya was barely 2 years old. Carmen had always been vague about the details, explaining only that Maya's father had been a soldier who struggled to adjust after his military service, and had left one day without explanation. The few photographs Carmen had shown Maya depicted a man in army fatigues with kind eyes and capable hands, but no concrete information about his service record, his unit, or the circumstances of his departure. Growing up, Maya had often wondered about the mechanical aptitude that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Carmen worked as a seamstress and had no particular affinity for anything more complex than a sewing machine. Maya's maternal grandparents had been farmers who understood basic equipment, maintenance, but nothing approaching the sophisticated systems Maya seemed to comprehend instinctively. The first hint of her unusual abilities had emerged during high school, when Maya had single-handedly repaired the engine of the school's aging bus after it broke down during a field trip. While other students waited for professional help, Maya had spent 20 minutes listening to the engine, tracing connections, and making adjustments that restored the vehicle to perfect working condition. The school mechanic, upon investigating her repairs, had declared them not only effective but implemented with a level of understanding that typically required years of experience. After graduating, Maya had worked at various automotive shops throughout New Mexico, quickly advancing from basic oil changes to complex engine rebuilds. Her reputation had eventually reached the attention of military contractors who recruited civilian specialists for specific projects. The pay was significantly better than local garage work, and the technical challenges appealed to her desire to understand increasingly sophisticated systems. What Maya didn't realize was that her work had begun attracting attention beyond the immediate maintenance community. Military personnel who observed her diagnostic techniques noted an approach that seemed to mirror combat engineering methodologies, a systematic way of understanding integrated systems that was typically learned through specialized military training, rather than civilian experience. On this particular morning, Maya approached the disabled Abrams with the same methodical patience she brought to every challenge. The tank crew had described the symptoms: sudden power loss during routine maneuvers, unusual vibrations in the engine compartment, and diagnostic codes that pointed to fuel system failure but didn't align with the visible condition of the components. Maya began her investigation by simply listening. With the engine compartment open, she placed her ear against various points of the massive turbine, her expression focused with the intensity of someone translating a foreign language. The sounds told her stories that weren't captured in technical readouts: a slight irregularity in the fuel pump rhythm, a resonance in the air intake system that suggested partial blockage, vibrations that indicated misalignment in components that should have been perfectly balanced. Her hands followed her ears, tracing fuel lines with a touch that could detect pressure variations, testing electrical connections with the sensitivity of someone who understood how power flowed through complex circuits. She removed panels and components with confident efficiency, her movements economical and purposeful rather than exploratory. 20 minutes into her investigation, Maya discovered the actual problem: a manufacturing defect in a fuel injector housing that had created a microscopic crack, allowing fuel to leak into areas where it disrupted the engine's precisely calibrated air-fuel mixture. The crack was so small that it wouldn't have been detected by standard diagnostic equipment, and its location was hidden behind components that most mechanics wouldn't have thought to examine. The repair itself was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than replacing the entire fuel system as the technical manual recommended, Maya fabricated a custom seal using materials available in the motor pool, a solution that addressed the root cause while avoiding weeks of waiting for replacement parts. Her work was precise, economical, and demonstrated an understanding of the engine's integrated systems that went far beyond fixing the immediate problem. As Maya completed her repairs and began reassembling the engine compartment, she became aware of being observed. A distinguished older man in army dress uniform had been standing at the edge of the motor pool for several minutes, his attention focused entirely on her work. Unlike the casual observation of curious personnel, his scrutiny felt deliberate and analytical, as if he were evaluating not just her technical skills, but something deeper about her methods and approach. General Robert Hayes had arrived at Nellie for a routine inspection of training operations, but the sight of this young civilian performing complex engine repair had captured his complete attention. In his 30-year military career, he had observed countless mechanics, engineers, and technical specialists, but something about this woman's approach triggered a profound sense of recognition. Her methodical diagnostic technique mirrored procedures he had seen used by combat engineers in field conditions, where understanding systems intuitively could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The way she listened to machinery, the careful attention to how components interacted rather than simply following troubleshooting checklists, the confident improvisation when standard solutions proved inadequate all suggested training and experience. That should have been impossible for a civilian contractor. More disturbing was a nagging familiarity in her movements, a way of tilting her head when concentrating that stirred memories he had tried to bury for over 2 decades. General Hayes had spent years learning to compartmentalize personal loss, to function effectively despite the weight of unanswered questions about soldiers who had served under his command, and then vanished into the civilian world without trace. Maya finished her work and activated the engine for testing. The massive turbine spooled up smoothly, its operation now silent and efficient where it had previously struggled and complained. The diagnostic readouts confirmed what her ears had already told her. The engine was operating within optimal parameters, the problem solved with a repair that would likely last longer than the standard replacement would have. The tank crew gathered around their vehicle with the relief of soldiers who had faced the prospect of extended delays in their training schedule. They tested all systems methodically, confirming that Maya's repair had not only solved the immediate problem, but had somehow improved the engine's overall performance beyond its original specifications. General Hayes approached as Maya gathered her tools, his expression carefully controlled, but his eyes sharp with questions that went far beyond technical curiosity about her repair methods. Maya looked up from organizing her equipment, suddenly aware that this was not a casual encounter with base personnel, but something more significant. The general's presence commanded attention without effort, his bearing reflecting decades of leadership and the weight of responsibility for thousands of soldiers under his command. His uniform displayed ribbons that told the story of a career spanning multiple conflicts, his silver hair cut in the precise style that marked career military officers, his eyes carrying the particular alertness of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions based on incomplete information. Maya stood respectfully, unsure of the appropriate protocol for interacting with such high-ranking military personnel, but sensing that this moment carried implications beyond her usual contractor responsibilities. The desert heat shimmered around them, creating an almost dreamlike quality to their encounter, as if the laws of ordinary coincidence had been suspended to allow something extraordinary to unfold. General Hayes studied her face with an intensity that made Maya uncomfortable, his gaze searching for something that remained unspoken. The silence stretched between them, weighted with questions that neither was yet prepared to ask directly, while around them the normal activities of the motor pool continued with mechanical efficiency. The moment felt suspended in time, pregnant with possibilities that could reshape understanding of family, loss, and the mysterious ways that people separated by circumstances beyond their control might find their way back to each other across decades of silence and carefully constructed distance. The morning had started like any other at Nellis Air Force Base, with the Nevada sun climbing steadily over the horizon and casting long shadows across the sprawling military installation. The motor pool buzzed with its usual activity as mechanics and technicians prepared vehicles for the day's training exercises, their conversations mixing with the sounds of engines warming up and equipment being tested. For most personnel on base, this Tuesday represented another routine day in the endless cycle of military preparation and maintenance. Maya Rodriguez had arrived at dawn, as was her custom when facing particularly challenging repair assignments. The disabled M1 Abrams tank had been the subject of extensive discussion among the maintenance crew for nearly a week, its mysterious engine failure representing the kind of technical puzzle that frustrated even experienced military mechanics. 3 separate diagnostic attempts had yielded contradictory results, leading to heated debates about whether the problem lay in the fuel system, the electronic controls, or some more fundamental mechanical failure. The tank belonged to Bravo Company, a unit scheduled to deploy to Eastern Europe within 6 weeks as part of NATO training exercises. Their preparation timeline was already compressed, leaving little room for the extended delays that complex mechanical failures typically demanded. The company commander had made it clear that alternative solutions needed to be found quickly, even if it meant bringing in civilian contractors with unconventional approaches to problem solving. Maya's reputation for solving impossible mechanical problems had reached Nellis through the informal network of maintenance supervisors who shared information about effective contractors across multiple installations. Her success rate with vehicles that others had declared beyond repair was remarkable enough to warrant the substantial consulting fees her services commanded. But more importantly, her work consistently proved reliable under the demanding conditions of military operations. The Abrams that awaited her attention was a formidable machine, weighing over 60 tons and powered by a gas turbine engine that generated 1,500 horsepower. Its sophisticated systems integrated mechanical, hydraulic, and electronic components in ways that required deep understanding of how each element affected overall performance. The tank represented the pinnacle of American armored vehicle technology, but this complexity also meant that diagnostic problems could cascade through multiple systems in ways that confounded traditional troubleshooting approaches. Maya began her work by interviewing the tank crew, a practice that set her apart from mechanics who relied primarily on technical readouts and diagnostic equipment. She understood that operators often noticed subtle changes in vehicle behavior long before problems became severe enough to trigger warning systems. Their descriptions of gradual power loss, unusual vibrations, and intermittent electronic glitches provided crucial context that cold data couldn't capture. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson, the tank commander, described the initial symptoms with the precision of someone whose life might depend on his vehicle's reliability. The problems had begun subtly during routine maneuvers 3 weeks earlier, manifesting as slight hesitation during acceleration and occasional fluctuations in engine temperature readings. Over time, these minor issues had escalated into more serious performance degradation, culminating in a complete power failure during a training exercise that left the massive vehicle stranded in the desert. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, the driver, added details about steering response and braking performance that suggested the engine problems were affecting multiple vehicle systems. Her observations about unusual sounds and vibrations provided Maya with additional diagnostic clues that wouldn't have appeared in any technical manual but which pointed towards specific areas of investigation. Specialist David Chen, the gunner, contributed information about power fluctuations affecting the turret systems and fire control computers. His technical background in electronics allowed him to describe anomalies in ways that helped Maya understand how the engine problem was propagating through the tank's integrated systems, creating secondary failures that masked the original source of trouble. The loader, Private First Class Maria Santos, offered the perspective of someone newer to armored vehicle operations, but with keen observational skills. Her descriptions of changes in the engine sound signature over time provided Maya with crucial information about the progression of the mechanical failure, suggesting patterns that experienced operators might have dismissed as normal variation. Armed with this comprehensive picture of the tank's declining performance, Maya began her physical examination of the vehicle. She approached the massive machine with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understood that complex problems rarely had simple solutions, but who also knew that sometimes the most sophisticated diagnostic equipment missed obvious clues that human senses could detect. The engine compartment of an Abrams tank was a marvel of engineering efficiency. with every available space utilized to house the components necessary to power and control the 60-ton vehicle. The gas turbine engine sat at the heart of this mechanical complexity, surrounded by fuel systems, cooling systems, electrical harnesses, and hydraulic components that had to work in perfect coordination to deliver the performance that combat operations demanded. Maya's initial inspection focused on the obvious potential failure points: fuel filters, air intake systems, exhaust components, and the electronic control modules that regulated engine operation. Each component told part of the story, but none revealed the smoking gun that would explain the tank's mysterious performance degradation. The fuel system appeared clean and properly pressurized. The air intake showed no signs of contamination or blockage, and the electronic systems passed all standard diagnostic tests. It was only when Maya began listening to the engine during idle operation that she detected the subtle irregularities that had escaped previous diagnostic attempts. The gas turbine's normal operation produced a characteristic sound signature, a complex harmony of mechanical and aerodynamic noise that experienced operators learned to interpret instinctively. Within this familiar symphony, Maya heard discordant notes that suggested problems occurring at frequencies too subtle for conventional diagnostic equipment to detect. Her investigation led her deeper into the engine's internal systems, following the acoustic clues like a detective pursuing leads in a complex case. The sound anomalies pointed toward the fuel injection system, but standard pressure tests had shown normal operation. Maya's experience with similar engines told her that the problem might be occurring only under specific operating conditions that weren't replicated during static testing. The breakthrough came when Maya discovered microscopic metal particles in the fuel system, debris so small that it had passed through standard filtration without triggering contamination alarms. These particles, she realized, were being generated by a failing component within the fuel injection assembly, but only during high-demand operation when internal pressures reached peak levels. During idle testing, the component operated normally, making the failure virtually undetectable through conventional diagnostic procedures. Tracing the source of the contamination required Maya to disassemble portions of the fuel injection system with surgical precision, documenting each step to ensure proper reassembly while searching for the component that was generating the destructive debris. The work was painstaking and required tools and techniques that went beyond standard maintenance procedures. But Maya's intuitive understanding of mechanical systems guided her investigation with remarkable efficiency. The failing component, when she finally located it, was a precision-machined fuel injector housing that had developed stress fractures, invisible to visual inspection, but sufficient to allow high-pressure fuel to erode the surrounding metal under extreme operating conditions. The erosion created the metal particles that were contaminating the fuel system, while simultaneously disrupting the precise fuel-air mixture ratios that the engine required for optimal performance. Maya's repair solution demonstrated the creative problem-solving that had earned her reputation throughout the military contractor community. Rather than replacing the entire fuel injection assembly, which would have required weeks of waiting for specialized parts, she fabricated a custom sleeve insert that reinforced the damaged housing while restoring proper fuel flow characteristics. The repair used readily available materials, but required machining precision that few mechanics could have achieved without specialized equipment. Her work progressed with the focused intensity of someone who understood that time was a critical factor in military operations. Each step of the repair process was executed with careful attention to detail, but also with the efficiency that comes from deep understanding of mechanical systems and their interdependencies. Maya's hands moved with practiced confidence, adjusting tolerances and alignment with the precision of someone who had performed similar repairs countless times, even though she had never worked on this specific type of fuel injection system before. The surrounding motor pool activity continued around Maya's workstation, but she remained absorbed in the technical challenge before her, unconscious of the growing audience of military personnel who had begun observing her unconventional repair methods. Word of the civilian contractor's progress had spread through the maintenance community, attracting mechanics and technicians who were curious about her approach to a problem that had stumped their collective expertise. Among the observers was Master Sergeant Carl Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran of armored vehicle maintenance who had seen every type of mechanical failure that tanks could develop. His initial skepticism about civilian contractors had given way to grudging respect as he watched Maya's systematic diagnostic approach and observed the precision of her repair work. Her methods were unorthodox but clearly effective, suggesting a level of mechanical understanding that typically required years of specialized military training. Technical Sergeant Lisa Park, an electronics specialist responsible for the tank's computer systems, found herself fascinated by Maya's ability to diagnose complex integrated problems without relying heavily on electronic diagnostic equipment. Her approach seemed to combine intuitive mechanical understanding with systematic troubleshooting in ways that Park had rarely encountered outside of the most experienced combat engineers. That the growing attention from military personnel created an atmosphere of anticipation around Maya's work, but she remained focused on the technical challenge at hand, unaware that her repair methods were being evaluated by observers whose interest went beyond mere professional curiosity. Her complete absorption in the mechanical problem before her prevented her from noticing that one particular observer had arrived, who was studying her work with an intensity that suggested personal rather than professional interest. As Maya completed the delicate reassembly of the fuel injection system and prepared to test her repair, the morning sun had climbed high enough to fill the motor pool with harsh desert light that created sharp shadows and made every surface almost too hot to touch. With bare hands, the heat would soon become oppressive, but for now it merely added to the focused intensity of the moment as Maya prepared to discover whether her innovative repair solution would restore the massive tank to full operational capability. Maya Rodriguez had learned to find solace in the predictable logic of mechanical systems, a refuge from the complexities of human relationships that had defined much of her 24 years. Growing up in the small farming community of Espanola, New Mexico, she had discovered early that machines communicated in ways that were honest and direct, unlike the careful silences and half-truths that seemed to characterize the adults in her life. Whenever certain subjects arose, her childhood home sat on 15 acres of high desert land that her mother Carmen had inherited from Maya's grandfather, a weathered adobe house with thick walls that kept the interior cool during scorching summers and retained warmth through the bitter mountain winters. The property included a small barn, a workshop that had belonged to Maya's grandfather, and an assortment of aging farm equipment that required constant maintenance to remain functional in the harsh, high-altitude environment. Carmen Rodriguez worked as a seamstress for a wedding dress shop in nearby Santa Fe, commuting 40 miles each way through winding mountain roads to earn the modest income that kept their small household afloat. She was a woman of quiet strength and careful words, someone who had learned to navigate life's challenges through persistence and the kind of practical wisdom that comes from facing difficulties without the luxury of dwelling on them for too long. Maya's earliest memories were filled with the sounds of her mother's sewing machine running late into the evening, the rhythmic mechanical noise providing a comforting backdrop to childhood. Bedtimes, Carmen took pride in her craftsmanship, creating elaborate wedding gowns and formal wear that required hundreds of hours of detailed handwork, each piece a testament to her skill and patience. The income was irregular, dependent on seasonal demand and the unpredictable needs of clients, but Carmen managed their finances with the same meticulous attention. She brought to her needlework the absence of Maya's father was a presence in their household, acknowledged through careful omissions rather than direct discussion. Carmen had never remarried, had rarely dated during Maya's childhood, and spoke of her father only in response to direct questions, which became increasingly rare as Maya learned to read the sadness that such inquiries brought to her mother's face. The few details Carmen shared painted a picture of a man who had loved his family but struggled with invisible wounds from his military service, ultimately choosing to leave rather than burden them with problems he couldn't solve. Maya had inherited her father's last name through birth certificates and legal documents, but knew almost nothing about the Rodriguez family history or the circumstances that had brought her parents together. Carmen's own family had been small and close-knit, farmers who understood hard work and self-reliance but had little experience with the complexities of military life or the challenges that veterans faced when transitioning back to civilian society. The workshop behind their house had originally been her grandfather's domain, filled with the tools and equipment necessary to maintain the small farm's aging machinery. After his death when Maya was 7, the space had sat largely unused, gathering dust and serving primarily as storage for items that Carmen couldn't bring herself to throw away but had no immediate use for. Maya had begun exploring the workshop during summer days when her mother was at work, initially drawn by curiosity about the mysterious tools and equipment her grandfather had left behind. Her first successful repair had been accidental, the result of trying to understand why the old riding mower wouldn't start after sitting unused through a long winter. Maya had been 11 years old, bored and unsupervised during summer vacation, when she decided to investigate the machine that had once kept their property neat and manageable. Following instincts she couldn't have explained, she had cleaned the carburetor, replaced the spark plug, and adjusted the fuel mixture until the engine roared back to life with a satisfaction that she still remembered vividly. Carmen had been initially alarmed to find her young daughter covered in grease and standing beside the running mower, but her concern had quickly given way to amazement when Maya demonstrated that she had somehow restored the machine to perfect working order. The repair had been both necessary and expensive to have done professionally, making Maya's success a practical blessing as much as a surprising display of mechanical aptitude. From that day forward, Maya had become the unofficial mechanic for their small household and gradually for their neighbors, who learned that the Rodriguez girl had an unusual gift for understanding why machines stopped working and how to make them function again. Her reputation had spread slowly through their rural community, built on successful repairs of everything from irrigation pumps to pickup truck engines to the complex hay balers that local farmers depended on during harvest season. Maya's mechanical abilities had provided her with a sense of identity and purpose that school subjects never quite matched. While she was a competent student who earned respectable grades, her real passion emerged in the workshop, where she spent hours after school and on weekends learning to understand increasingly complex mechanical systems. She devoured repair manuals, studied electrical diagrams, and experimented with different approaches to problem solving until mechanical repair became as natural as reading. The transition from hobby to profession had occurred gradually during her final years of high school, as word of her abilities reached beyond their immediate community to farmers and ranchers throughout the region who needed reliable repair services for specialized equipment. Maya had begun charging modest fees for her work, contributing to the household income while building experience with increasingly sophisticated machinery. Her decision to forgo college in favor of pursuing mechanical work professionally had been difficult for Carmen, who had hoped that education might provide Maya with opportunities beyond the physical labor that had defined their family's experience for generations. However, Carmen's practical nature had ultimately accepted that Maya's unusual talents represented a legitimate path to financial security and personal fulfillment, even if it wasn't the traditional route that most parents envisioned for their daughters. Maya's transition into professional mechanical work had taken her from local farms to automotive shops in larger towns, each position providing exposure to different types of machinery and repair challenges. Her reputation for solving problems that stumped other mechanics had gradually attracted the attention of supervisors and shop owners, who recognized that her unusual diagnostic abilities could be valuable for particularly difficult cases. Opportunity to work as a civilian contractor for military installations had emerged through a recommendation from a shop owner who had connections within the defense contractor community. Maya's success rate with complex mechanical problems, combined with her reliability and professional demeanor, had made her an attractive candidate for assignments that required both technical expertise and security clearance for work on sensitive military equipment. What Maya had never fully understood was how naturally military mechanical systems seemed to respond to her diagnostic approach. While other contractors often struggled with the unfamiliar designs and specialized components that military vehicles employed, Maya found herself intuitively grasping the engineering principles behind even the most sophisticated equipment. Her repair methods often mirrored procedures that were typically taught only in advanced military technical schools, suggesting a familiarity with military engineering philosophy that should have been impossible for someone with her civilian background. Her work at various military installations had exposed her to equipment ranging from basic transport vehicles to sophisticated aircraft and armored fighting vehicles, each assignment building her expertise while raising questions about the source of her remarkable mechanical intuition. Supervisors had occasionally commented on her unusual affinity for military systems, but Maya had always attributed her success to general mechanical principles rather than any specific connection to military engineering practices. The assignment at Nellis Air Force Base represented one of the most challenging contracts Maya had undertaken, involving complex systems that pushed the boundaries of her experience while offering substantial financial compensation for successful completion. The base's reputation for housing cutting-edge military technology had attracted her professional interest, while the Nevada location provided a welcome change from the familiar landscapes of New Mexico. Maya had arrived at Nellis with the same systematic approach she brought to every new assignment, studying technical manuals and familiarizing herself with the specific equipment she would be working on while maintaining the professional distance that military contracts typically required. Her living arrangements in a modest apartment near the base were temporary and utilitarian, reflecting her focus on the work rather than any desire to establish permanent roots in Nevada. The morning routine that had brought her to the disabled Abrams tank was typical of her professional methodology, beginning before dawn with review of technical documentation and diagnostic reports from previous repair attempts. Maya had learned that understanding the history of a mechanical problem was often as important as examining the equipment itself, providing crucial context for interpreting symptoms and avoiding solutions that had already proven ineffective. Her preparation had included consultation with the tank crew, whose detailed observations would guide her initial diagnostic approach, conversations that had revealed not only the progression of the mechanical failure, but also the human impact of equipment reliability on soldiers whose lives might depend on their vehicle's performance. Maya had always understood that her repair work carried responsibilities beyond simple mechanical function, but military contracts emphasized the life and death implications of mechanical reliability in ways that civilian work rarely matched. As Maya worked on the tank's complex fuel injection system, surrounded by the controlled chaos of the motor pool and the growing attention of military personnel who had begun observing her unconventional repair methods, she remained focused on the technical challenge before her, unaware that her systematic approach and intuitive understanding of military mechanical systems was raising questions that went far beyond professional curiosity about her diagnostic techniques. The heat of the Nevada morning was beginning to build toward the oppressive levels that would make afternoon work nearly unbearable. But Maya's absorption in the mechanical puzzle before her rendered environmental discomfort irrelevant. Her attention entirely devoted to the delicate process of restoring the massive tank to the operational reliability that its crew would depend on in whatever challenges lay ahead. Carmen Rodriguez had never intended to raise her daughter alone in the high desert of northern New Mexico, surrounded by memories of a man whose absence shaped their daily lives more powerfully than his presence ever had. The small adobe house in Espanola had been meant as a temporary refuge, a place to heal and regroup after Daniel Rivera's disappearance. But temporary arrangements had a way of becoming permanent when the alternative meant confronting truths too painful to acknowledge. Daniel Rivera had been 26 when he first deployed to Afghanistan as a combat engineer with the 82nd Airborne Division, a young man filled with the confidence that came from growing up in a military family where service was considered both duty and honor. His father had served in Vietnam, his grandfather in Korea, and Daniel had enlisted immediately after high school with the certainty that military life would provide him with purpose, structure, and the opportunity to serve his country with distinction. Man who returned from his first deployment 15 months later bore little resemblance to the enthusiastic soldier who had left. Daniel's letters during deployment had gradually shifted in tone from excitement about his engineering work to careful descriptions of daily routines that revealed nothing about the realities he was facing. Carmen had sensed the change even through the filtered communication that military families learned to accept, but nothing had prepared her for the hollow-eyed stranger who came home wearing Daniel's face. Carmen had met Daniel during his brief leave between basic training and his first deployment, a whirlwind romance that had begun at a USO dance in Albuquerque and led to marriage within 6 weeks. She had been working as a seamstress even then, supporting herself through community college courses that she had hoped would lead to a teaching career. Daniel's deployment had interrupted those plans, but Carmen had embraced her role as a military wife with the optimism of someone who believed that love could overcome any challenge. Their daughter Maya had been born during Daniel's second deployment, a beautiful baby girl who inherited her father's dark hair and her mother's determined chin. Daniel had managed to return for the birth through emergency leave, spending 2 precious weeks holding his daughter and marveling at the miracle of her existence before returning to the combat zone where his engineering skills were desperately needed for route clearance and explosive ordnance disposal. Carmen had documented those early months of Maya's life through hundreds of photographs and detailed letters, determined to help Daniel feel connected to his daughter despite the thousands of miles that separated them. She had recorded Maya's first words, her first steps, her first attempts at walking, creating a comprehensive record that would allow Daniel to experience his daughter's development even from a distance. Daniel's second deployment had lasted 18 months, longer than originally planned due to the escalating needs of military operations in Afghanistan. His letters home had become increasingly infrequent and mechanical, offering little insight into his daily experiences beyond generic assurances that he was safe and thinking of his family. Carmen had learned to read between the lines, recognizing signs of stress and exhaustion in her husband's careful words. The Daniel who returned from his second deployment was noticeably changed, more withdrawn, and prone to sudden periods of silence that could last for hours. He struggled to reconnect with Maya, who had grown from an infant into a walking toddler during his absence. Carmen had watched her husband's efforts to bond with their daughter, seeing his frustration when Maya initially shied away from the stranger who claimed to be her father. Daniel's third deployment had been voluntary, a decision that had shocked Carmen and suggested problems that went deeper than the normal readjustment challenges that military families faced. He had explained his choice as professional obligation, claiming that his specialized experience was needed for critical missions that newer engineers couldn't handle safely. Carmen had sensed that the explanation was incomplete, that Daniel was running toward something he couldn't articulate rather than simply fulfilling duty. The final deployment had lasted 2 years, during which Daniel's communication had dwindled to official military notifications that he was alive and operational. Carmen had received no personal letters, no phone calls, no indication that her husband remembered he had a family waiting for his return. Military support networks had assured her that such communication lapses were not uncommon during intensive operational periods, but Carmen had known intuitively that something fundamental had broken in their relationship. Daniel's return from his final deployment had been marked by a coldness that bordered on hostility toward the civilian life that awaited him. He had seemed unable to relate to Carmen's concerns about domestic matters, dismissive of Maya's need for paternal attention, and increasingly agitated by the normal sounds and activities of family life. Carmen had suggested counseling, but Daniel had rejected any implication that he needed help adjusting to circumstances that should have felt natural and welcoming. The explosive argument that had preceded Daniel's disappearance had been triggered by Maya's innocent request for help with a broken toy truck. Daniel's reaction had been disproportionate and frightening, a burst of anger that had sent 3-year-old Maya running to her bedroom in tears. Carmen's attempt to address Daniel's behavior had escalated into a confrontation that revealed the depth of his psychological wounds and his complete inability to acknowledge that he needed professional help. Daniel had left that same night, taking only his military duffel bag and leaving behind his wedding ring on the kitchen table beside a brief note that explained nothing about his intentions or destination. The note had contained no apology, no expression of love for his family, no indication that he regretted the pain his departure would cause. Carmen had found it the next morning, along with Maya's confused questions about where Daddy had gone and when he would be coming home. The months that followed had been filled with desperate attempts to locate Daniel through military channels, veterans organizations, and private investigators who specialized in finding missing persons. Carmen had contacted every friend, family member, and military colleague she could identify, hoping that someone might have information about Daniel's whereabouts or state of mind. The responses had been uniformly unhelpful, revealing that Daniel had systematically severed connections with everyone from his previous life. Military officials had been sympathetic but limited in their ability to assist with locating a veteran who had completed his service obligations and left voluntarily. Daniel's discharge had been honorable, his service record exemplary, and his disappearance represented a personal choice rather than a military matter requiring official intervention. Carmen had been left to navigate the complex bureaucracy of veterans' benefits while simultaneously trying to locate a man who clearly didn't want to be found. The financial challenges of single parenthood had forced Carmen to abandon her college plans and focus entirely on supporting Maya through her seamstress work. The income was irregular and modest, requiring careful budgeting and constant worry about unexpected expenses. Carmen had considered moving back to her parents' home in Santa Fe, but their small house was already crowded, and she had wanted to maintain some independence while hoping that Daniel might eventually return to the address he knew. Maya's questions about her father had evolved over the years from simple confusion about his absence to more complex inquiries about why he had left and whether his departure was somehow her fault. Carmen had struggled to provide age-appropriate explanations that were honest without being hurtful, emphasizing that Daniel's problems were not related to anything Maya had done while avoiding details about mental health issues that a child couldn't understand. The discovery of Maya's mechanical abilities had provided both mother and daughter with a positive focus that helped balance the ongoing sadness of Daniel's absence. Carmen had encouraged Maya's interests while privately wondering whether her daughter's intuitive understanding of mechanical systems might have been inherited from her father, whose military engineering background suggested similar analytical capabilities. Carmen had kept every official document related to Daniel's military service, hoping that someday the information might prove useful for obtaining benefits or assistance that Maya might need for college or other opportunities. The files contained commendations for Daniel's service in Afghanistan, documentation of his specialized training in explosive ordnance disposal and route clearance operations, and personnel records that revealed a decorated career cut short by psychological wounds that the military had been poorly equipped to address. The few photographs Carmen had preserved from Daniel's military service showed a young man whose competence and dedication were evident in his bearing and expression. These images contrasted sharply with Carmen's memories of the hollow-eyed stranger who had returned from his final deployment, suggesting the transformation that combat experience had wrought on her husband's fundamental character. Carmen had occasionally wondered whether the confident soldier in those photographs bore any resemblance to the man Daniel might have become if different choices had been made. Maya's decision to pursue mechanical work professionally had stirred complicated emotions in Carmen, who recognized her daughter's exceptional abilities, while worrying about the physical demands and uncertain financial prospects of such a career. The transition into military contracting work had been particularly difficult for Carmen to accept, given the association with the military life that had ultimately destroyed her marriage and taken Maya's father away from their family. Carmen had never remarried, partly from choice and partly from the practical challenges of dating while raising a daughter alone on a limited income. Her social life was constrained by work demands and parental responsibilities, but she had also found that few men were interested in the complications that came with a partner who had an absent husband, whose status remained legally and emotionally unresolved. The legal ambiguity of Daniel's disappearance had created ongoing complications for Carmen's ability to access certain benefits or make definitive plans for the future. Without evidence of death or formal divorce proceedings, she remained technically married to a man who had vanished without explanation, a status that affected everything from tax filings to medical insurance, to her ability to make certain legal decisions regarding Maya's welfare. As Maya's work began taking her to military installations across the Southwest, Carmen found herself confronting memories and emotions that she had spent years learning to suppress. The sight of her daughter's increasing comfort with military equipment and procedures stirred fears that Maya might somehow be drawn into the same destructive patterns that had claimed her father, while also suggesting connections to Daniel's legacy that might provide answers to questions that had haunted their family for over 2 decades. The massive Abrams tank engine roared to life with a smooth power that had been absent for weeks, its turbine spinning up to operational speed with the precise harmony that indicated perfect mechanical balance. Maya stepped back from the engine compartment, wiping her hands on an oil-stained rag while listening intently to the subtle sounds that would tell her whether her innovative repair had truly solved the complex fuel system problem that had baffled 3 previous mechanics. The tank crew gathered around their restored vehicle with expressions of relief and amazement, their faces reflecting the satisfaction of soldiers whose critical equipment had been returned to full operational capability. Sergeant First Class Thompson climbed into the commander's position and began running through systematic checks of all vehicle systems, his experienced hands moving across controls with the automatic precision of someone whose life might depend on this machine's reliability. Staff Sergeant Walsh settled into the driver's seat and began testing the engine's response to various power demands, gradually increasing throttle settings, while monitoring temperature and pressure readings that would reveal any remaining problems with the fuel injection system. Her practiced ear detected the subtle changes in engine note that indicated proper fuel-air mixture ratios and the absence of the irregular combustion patterns that had plagued the vehicle's recent performance. Specialist Chen activated the turret systems and fire control computers, watching diagnostic displays that confirmed the engine was now providing stable electrical power to all secondary systems. The electronic components that had suffered from voltage fluctuations during the fuel system failure were now operating within normal parameters, their displays showing the steady readings that indicated reliable power delivery. Private Santos monitored the engine's acoustic signature from her position as loader, comparing the current sound to her memories of the tank's operation before the mechanical problems had begun developing. Her untrained but sensitive ear confirmed what the technical readouts were indicating. The engine was now running with the smooth efficiency that characterized properly maintained military equipment. Maya watched the crew's systematic testing procedure with professional satisfaction, recognizing the thoroughness that military personnel brought to equipment evaluation. Their methodical approach to confirming her repair's effectiveness was more comprehensive than most civilian mechanics would have attempted. But Maya understood that combat operations demanded absolute reliability from every system. The repair itself had required nearly 4 hours of meticulous work, during which Maya had disassembled, modified, and reassembled critical components of the fuel injection system with surgical precision. Her custom solution had involved fabricating a replacement seal from materials available in the motor pool, machining tolerances that required the kind of precision normally associated with specialized manufacturing equipment rather than field repair techniques. The breakthrough had come when Maya identified microscopic stress, fractures in a fuel injector housing that were allowing high-pressure fuel to leak into areas where it disrupted the engine's carefully calibrated combustion process. The damage was so subtle that it wouldn't have been detected by standard diagnostic equipment, and its location was hidden behind components that most mechanics would never have thought to examine, without clear evidence pointing toward that specific area. Maya's diagnostic approach had combined systematic analysis with intuitive understanding of how integrated mechanical systems could fail in unexpected ways. Her willingness to pursue seemingly unlikely possibilities had led her to discover the root cause of problems that had been misdiagnosed as electrical failures, fuel contamination, or computer malfunctions by previous repair attempts. The custom seal she had fabricated represented an elegant solution that addressed the underlying mechanical failure while avoiding the weeks of delay that replacing the entire fuel injection assembly would have required. Her repair work demonstrated both creative problem-solving abilities and the kind of hands-on manufacturing skills that were typically associated with specialized industrial training, rather than general mechanical experience. As the tank crew completed their testing procedures and confirmed that all systems were operating normally, Maya began organizing her tools and preparing to document the repair for the maintenance records that would accompany the vehicle throughout its operational life. Military equipment required detailed documentation of all modifications and repairs, creating a permanent record that future mechanics could reference when addressing similar problems. The gathering crowd of motor pool personnel who had been observing Maya's work began to disperse as the successful completion of the repair became evident. Mechanics and technicians who had been curious about her unconventional diagnostic methods returned to their own assignments, though several lingered to ask questions about her approach to solving complex mechanical problems that had resisted conventional troubleshooting procedures. Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached Maya with the respect that one professional mechanic shows another when witnessing truly exceptional work. His 20 years of experience with armored vehicles had given him deep appreciation for the kind of innovative thinking that Maya had demonstrated, and he was genuinely curious about the background that had prepared her for such sophisticated diagnostic work. Technical Sergeant Park joined the conversation, her expertise in electronic systems providing a different perspective on Maya's repair methodology. She had been particularly impressed by Maya's ability to understand how mechanical failures in one system could cascade through integrated components to create seemingly unrelated problems in other areas, a level of systems thinking that typically required extensive military technical training. The informal debriefing that developed around Maya's workstation provided an opportunity for military personnel to learn from her diagnostic approach while offering insights into military maintenance procedures that might inform her future contract work. The exchange of professional knowledge represented the kind of mutual learning that occurred when civilian specialists brought fresh perspectives to military technical challenges. Maya found herself answering questions about her background and training, explaining how her experience with civilian mechanical systems had prepared her for working on military equipment despite the obvious differences in complexity and design. Philosophy. Her responses revealed the self-taught nature of much of her expertise, which impressed the military mechanics who understood how difficult it was to develop such sophisticated diagnostic abilities without formal technical education. Conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a figure whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere around the work area. General Robert Hayes approached the group with the measured pace of someone accustomed to command authority, his uniform and bearing marking him as significantly senior to the enlisted personnel who had been discussing Maya's repair work. Military personnel around Maya's workstation came to attention with automatic precision, their casual conversation replaced by the formal respectfulness that high-ranking officers commanded. Maya, unfamiliar with military protocol but sensing the change in atmosphere, straightened her posture while continuing to organize her tools and equipment. General Hayes surveyed the scene with practiced eyes that took in the restored tank, the dispersing crowd of mechanics, and the young civilian contractor whose work had apparently solved a problem that had challenged his base's maintenance capabilities. His expression remained carefully neutral, but his attention focused on Maya with an intensity that suggested more than casual interest in her technical achievements. The general's presence at a motor pool repair site was unusual enough to generate curiosity among the assembled personnel, who recognized that senior officers typically dealt with administrative and strategic matters rather than individual maintenance issues. His obvious interest in Maya's work suggested that her repair of the disabled tank had attracted attention at levels far above the normal scope of contractor activities. Maya became aware of being studied with an analytical intensity that made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't identify the source of her unease. General Hayes's examination of her seemed to go beyond professional evaluation of her technical skills, as if he were searching for something specific in her appearance or mannerisms that remained unspoken but significant. The silence that had fallen over the group created an atmosphere of expectation, with everyone present sensing that this encounter represented more than routine acknowledgement of successful contract work. General Hayes's reputation as a demanding but fair leader was well known throughout the base, and his personal involvement in recognizing civilian contractor achievements was sufficiently rare to indicate special circumstances. Maya completed her tool organization with deliberate efficiency, using the familiar routine to maintain composure while trying to understand why a general's attention felt so personally significant. Her experience with military contracts had taught her to expect professional interactions with base personnel, but this felt different in ways that she couldn't articulate or rationalize. The restored tank continued its idle operation in the background, its smooth engine noise providing an audible testament to Maya's successful repair work. The mechanical sound represented tangible proof of her technical capabilities, but it also served as a reminder that her work involved equipment that would soon be operated by soldiers whose lives might depend on its reliability in combat situations. General Hayes finally broke the silence with a question that seemed simple but carried undertones that suggested deeper significance than its surface meaning would indicate. His voice carried the authority of command, while maintaining a carefully controlled neutrality that revealed nothing about his motivations for initiating this conversation. The question itself was straightforward enough, an inquiry about Maya's background and training that might have been expected from any senior officer interested in understanding how civilian contractors develop the capabilities necessary for working on sophisticated military equipment. However, the general's intense focus and the formal atmosphere he had created suggested that her answer might have implications beyond simple professional curiosity. Maya prepared to respond with the same straightforward professionalism she brought to all military interactions. unaware that her words might provide crucial information for questions that had haunted General Hayes for over 2 decades, or that this seemingly routine post-repair conversation was about to open doorways to connections that neither of them had imagined possible. General Hayes stepped closer to Maya's work area, his polished boots crunching softly on the gravel that surrounded the motor pool maintenance bay. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting shorter shadows and creating the kind of harsh desert light that made every detail stand out with crystalline clarity. His approach was measured and deliberate, the movement of someone accustomed to command presence, but also careful not to intimidate through unnecessary displays of authority. "Miss Rodriguez," the general began, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of an officer who had learned to gather information without revealing his intentions. "I understand you've successfully repaired a vehicle that has challenged our best mechanics for nearly 2 weeks. That's remarkable work, especially considering the complexity of modern military systems." Maya looked up from securing her tool case, meeting the general's gaze with the directness she had learned to project when dealing with military personnel. "Thank you, sir." The fuel injection system had developed some unusual failure patterns. But once I identified the root cause, the repair was relatively straightforward. The general nodded, but his attention seemed focused on more than her technical explanation. His eyes moved across her face with an intensity that suggested he was comparing what he saw against some internal reference point. "Your diagnostic approach was quite sophisticated. Where did you receive your training in military vehicle systems?" "I'm mostly self-taught, sir," Maya replied, sensing that this conversation was heading toward territory that felt personally significant in ways she couldn't explain. "I've worked on various types of mechanical systems since I was young, and many of the principles transfer between civilian and military equipment." General Hayes's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression that might have indicated recognition or surprise. "Self-taught mechanical expertise of this caliber is unusual. Your methodology suggests familiarity with military engineering principles that are typically learned through formal training programs." Maya felt a flutter of uncertainty about where this line of questioning was leading. "I've always had an intuitive understanding of how complex systems work together, sir. When I encounter new equipment, I try to understand the engineering philosophy behind its design before attempting repairs." "Engineering philosophy," the general repeated, his tone suggesting that her choice of words had particular significance. "That's an interesting way to describe diagnostic thinking. It suggests understanding of how military engineers approach integrated systems design." He paused, studying her face more intently. "Tell me about your family background, Miss Rodriguez. Are there any military connections that might explain your affinity for this type of work?" The question struck Maya with unexpected force, touching on the carefully guarded uncertainties that had shaped her entire life. "My father served in the Army, sir, but he left when I was very young. I don't know much about his military experience, or whether it might have influenced my mechanical abilities." General Hayes became very still, his military bearing masking what appeared to be intense internal processing. "Your father's name was Rodriguez?" "Daniel Rivera Rodriguez," Maya replied, wondering why the general's interest had suddenly intensified. "He was a combat engineer, I believe, though my mother doesn't talk about his service very much." The effect of her words on General Hayes was immediate and dramatic. The careful neutrality of his expression cracked slightly, revealing something that looked like recognition mixed with profound shock. His hands, previously held at parade rest behind his back, moved to his sides as if he needed to steady himself against information that challenged his understanding of reality. "Daniel Rivera Rodriguez," the general repeated slowly, his voice now carrying undertones of personal emotion that contrasted sharply with his previous professional demeanor. "Combat engineer, 82nd Airborne Division, served 3 deployments. In Afghanistan between 2003 and 2009? Maya stared at him in amazement. You knew my father? The general's composure wavered visibly as decades of careful emotional control encountered a truth he had never expected to confront. Staff Sergeant Daniel Rodriguez was one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege to command. He served under me during his second and third deployments, specializing in explosive ordnance disposal and route clearance operations. The motor pool around them seemed to fade into background irrelevance as Maya processed this revelation. You were my father's commanding officer? I was, General Hayes confirmed, his voice now carrying the weight of memory and regret. Daniel was exceptional at his job, one of the most intuitive engineers I encountered in 30 years of military service. He had an almost supernatural ability to understand how complex systems worked, to diagnose problems that baffled other specialists. Maya felt a rush of emotions that ranged from excitement at learning something concrete about her father to confusion about the circumstances that had brought this information to light. What happened to him, sir? My mother said. He struggled after returning from deployment, but she's never explained why he left or where he went. General Hayes looked around the motor pool, suddenly aware that their conversation was taking place in a very public setting with numerous military personnel within hearing distance. This is not a discussion we should have here, Miss Rodriguez. There are aspects of your father's service and subsequent circumstances that require privacy and careful explanation. The general's obvious discomfort with their public setting made Maya realize that her family story was about to become much more complicated than she had ever imagined. Are you saying there's more to my father's disappearance than personal problems adjusting to civilian life? I'm saying that your father's case involved circumstances that I've never fully understood, and that finding you here, displaying the same remarkable engineering intuition he possessed, raises questions that I've been carrying for over 20 years. General Hayes paused, seeming to wrestle with decisions about how much to reveal. Would you be willing to meet with me privately this afternoon? There are things about your father's service and his disappearance that you deserve to know, but they require careful explanation. Maya nodded immediately, her curiosity about her father's mysterious past overwhelming any concerns about the complexity that such revelations might bring to her life. Yes, sir. I want to understand what happened to him. My office at 1500 hours, the general instructed, his manner returning to military formality, even as his eyes remained focused on Maya with newfound intensity. Bring any documents or information you have about your father's service. There may be details that help complete a picture I've been trying to understand for decades. As General Hayes prepared to leave, he turned back to Maya with an expression that combined professional respect with something that looked like paternal concern. Miss Rodriguez, I want you to understand that your father was a hero. Whatever circumstances led to his departure from military service and from your family, his courage and dedication in combat situations saved countless lives. The man I knew would never have chosen to abandon his family unless he believed that leaving was somehow protecting them. The general's words stirred emotions in Maya that she had spent years learning to suppress, hope and pain intertwining in ways that made her throat tighten with unshed tears. Thank you for telling me that, sir. It means more than you know. General Hayes nodded curtly and began walking away, but paused after several steps and returned to where Maya stood. There's something else you should know before this afternoon. Your diagnostic work on that tank engine, the way you approached the problem and developed your solution. It's exactly how your father would have handled the same challenge. The similarity is so precise that watching you work was like seeing him again. The revelation that her mechanical abilities might be directly inherited from her father provided Maya with a sense of connection she had never experienced before. He was really that good at mechanical work? Daniel Rodriguez could look at a broken vehicle and understand its problem within minutes, then develop repair solutions that were so innovative They became standard procedures throughout our unit. The general's voice carried unmistakable pride in his former subordinate. He once repaired a damaged mine-resistant vehicle using spare parts from 3 different systems, creating a hybrid solution that not only worked but improved the vehicle's performance beyond original specifications. Maya absorbed this information with growing amazement at the parallels between her own repair methodology and her father's legendary abilities. Why did he leave the army, sir? If he was so valued as a soldier, what could have made him walk away from that life? General Hayes's expression darkened with the weight of memories he had clearly carried for many years. That's part of what we need to discuss this afternoon, Miss Rodriguez. Your father's final deployment involved classified operations that I'm only partially authorized to discuss, but I can tell you that he experienced things that would challenge any person's ability to function normally afterward. The mention of classified operations introduced elements of mystery and complexity that Maya hadn't anticipated, suggesting that her father's story involved national security considerations beyond the personal trauma that military families typically faced. Are you saying his problems were related to specific missions rather than general combat stress? I'm saying that Daniel Rodriguez volunteered for operations that most soldiers would have refused, and that his experiences during those missions affected him in ways that the military was poorly equipped to address at that time. General Hayes met her gaze directly. The man who returned from his final deployment was carrying burdens that I didn't fully understand then and still struggle to comprehend now. The complexity of her father's military experience was beginning to overwhelm Maya's ability to process the information emotionally while maintaining professional composure in such a public setting. Sir, is there any possibility that my father is still alive, that he might be found after all these years? General Hayes hesitated before answering, his expression suggesting that this question touched on the most painful aspects of her father's story. That's part of what we need to discuss privately, Miss Rodriguez. There are aspects of your father's disappearance that involve ongoing investigations and classified information that I can only share under specific circumstances. The implication that her father's fate might still be officially undetermined. After more than 20 years introduced possibilities that Maya had never allowed herself to consider seriously. You mean the military is still looking for him? I mean that there are people, myself included, who have never stopped wondering what happened to Daniel Rodriguez after he left military service. General Hayes replied carefully, finding you here, demonstrating the same extraordinary abilities he possessed, may provide answers to questions that have haunted me for decades. The weight of these revelations was beginning to affect Maya's ability to maintain her composure. The combination of learning about her father's military achievements and the ongoing mystery of his disappearance creating an emotional complexity that threatened to overwhelm her professional demeanor. Sir, I don't understand how my being here could provide answers about my father's fate. General Hayes looked around the motor pool one final time, confirming that their conversation was attracting attention from personnel, who were clearly curious about the extended discussion between a general and a civilian contractor. Miss Rodriguez, there are aspects of this situation that require careful explanation in a secure environment. I will see you at 1500 hours, and I promise you will have answers to questions you've carried your entire life. As the general walked away, Maya found herself standing alone beside the restored tank, surrounded by the normal activities of the motor pool, but feeling as though her understanding of reality had been fundamentally altered by a conversation that had lasted less than 15 minutes. The walk across Nellis Air Force Base to General Hayes's office building felt surreal to Maya, as if she were moving through a landscape that had suddenly taken on profound personal significance. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the base perimeter, its harsh beauty unchanged by the revelations that had transformed her understanding of her own identity within the span of a single morning. Military personnel moved purposefully along sidewalks and between buildings, their routines continuing with mechanical precision while Maya struggled to process the implications of learning that her father's former commanding officer had been watching her work. The administrative building that housed General Hayes's office was a study in military efficiency, its architecture reflecting the functional priorities that governed all aspects of base design. Security checkpoints processed visitors with practiced thoroughness, but Maya's civilian contractor credentials and the general's specific instructions ensured swift passage through procedures that might otherwise have required extensive verification and escort arrangements. Maya carried a manila folder containing the few documents about her father that her mother had preserved over the years, his discharge papers, a handful of commendation certificates, and several photographs that showed a young soldier whose confident bearing matched the exceptional abilities that General Hayes had described. The folder felt inadequate given the magnitude of what she hoped to learn, but it represented the complete extent of official information about Daniel Rodriguez that their family possessed. The general's aide, a efficient young captain, escorted Maya through corridors lined with photographs documenting the base's history and mission. Military awards and unit citations covered the walls alongside images of aircraft and personnel that told the story of decades of service and sacrifice. Maya found herself searching these displays for any indication of her father's presence, wondering whether his contributions to military operations had earned recognition that she had never known existed. General Hayes's office reflected the personality of a career military officer who had learned to balance personal touches with professional requirements. The space was dominated by a massive desk positioned to overlook the airfield through windows that provided commanding views of flight operations. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with technical manuals, strategic studies, and leadership texts that spoke to a mind constantly engaged with the complexities of military command. Personal photographs occupied discrete locations throughout the office, images that provided glimpses into the general's family life and military career without overwhelming the workspace's professional character. Maya noticed pictures of graduation ceremonies, change of command events, and what appeared to be family gatherings. Each image carefully positioned to be visible from the general's perspective, but not intrusive to visitors. General Hayes rose from behind his desk as Maya entered, his manner formal but noticeably warmer than their earlier interaction in the motor pool. The privacy of his office had allowed him to set aside the careful neutrality required for public conversations, revealing the emotional investment in the discussion they were about to have. "Please, sit down, Miss Rodriguez," the general said, gesturing toward chairs arranged in a conversation area away from his desk. "Can I offer you coffee or water? This may take some time, and I want you to be comfortable." Maya accepted coffee gratefully, using the brief preparation time to study the general's demeanor and try to prepare herself for revelations that might fundamentally alter her understanding of her family's history. His movements suggested barely controlled tension, as if the conversation they were about to have carried personal significance that went beyond professional interest in a former subordinate's welfare. "Before we begin," General Hayes said, settling into the chair across from Maya, "I want you to understand that some of what I'm about to tell you involves classified information that I'm sharing based on my assessment that you have a legitimate need to know details about your father's service and subsequent circumstances." The formal warning about classified information introduced an element of gravity that made Maya realize this conversation would involve national security considerations she had never imagined connected to her family's personal tragedy. "I understand. Sir, I just want to know what happened to my father and why he felt he had to leave his family." General Hayes opened a thick file folder that had been waiting on the table beside his chair, its contents organized with the systematic thoroughness that characterized all military documentation. "Your father's service record is exemplary in every respect. Daniel Rodriguez was promoted rapidly through enlisted ranks. based on technical expertise and leadership abilities that set him apart from his contemporaries. Maya leaned forward as the general began displaying photographs and documents that brought her father's military career into sharp focus for the first time in her life. The images showed a young soldier who evolved through successive deployments from eager recruit to seasoned combat veteran, his bearing and expression reflecting the confidence that came from mastering extremely dangerous and technically demanding work. Daniel's specialty was explosive ordnance disposal and route clearance, some of the most hazardous duties in modern military operations, General Hayes explained, pointing to photographs that showed her father working with sophisticated detection equipment and bomb disposal robots. These missions required not only technical expertise, but also psychological resilience that most soldiers don't possess. The photographs revealed aspects of her father's military experience that Maya had never imagined, showing him in full protective gear working to neutralize improvised explosive devices, operating complex machinery designed to detect hidden threats, and leading teams of specialists whose work cleared safe passage for other military units. The danger inherent in such operations was evident in every image, making Maya understand for the first time the extraordinary courage that her father's daily duties had required. During his second deployment under my command, Daniel became involved in a classified program that I can only describe in general terms. General Hayes continued, his voice taking on the careful modulation of someone discussing sensitive information. The program involved developing new techniques for detecting and neutralizing sophisticated explosive devices that conventional methods couldn't address effectively. Maya studied her father's face in photographs that showed him working alongside equipment she didn't recognize, sophisticated systems that appeared to represent cutting-edge military technology. Was this experimental work dangerous beyond normal combat operations? Extremely dangerous, the general confirmed. The program required volunteers who were willing to test unproven detection methods against live explosive devices in controlled, but inherently unpredictable conditions. Your father not only volunteered, but became one of the program's most valuable contributors. The revelation that her father had voluntarily undertaken experimental military work that exceeded normal combat dangers provided new context for understanding the psychological burdens he had carried upon returning to civilian life. Maya began to comprehend that his struggle with readjustment might have involved experiences that went far beyond typical combat stress. The program achieved remarkable success in developing detection and neutralization techniques that saved countless lives during subsequent operations, General Hayes continued. Daniel's contributions were directly responsible for breakthrough methods that became standard procedures throughout military explosive ordnance disposal units. Maya felt a surge of pride in her father's achievements, tempered by growing understanding of the personal cost such contributions had required. But the work affected him psychologically? The experimental nature of the program meant that participants experienced failures as well as successes, the general explained carefully. Daniel was present during several incidents where unproven techniques failed to detect sophisticated devices, resulting in explosions that caused casualties among personnel who had trusted the experimental methods. The weight of survivor guilt and professional responsibility that her father must have carried became clearer to Maya as she considered the implications of being personally involved in developing techniques whose failures cost other soldiers their lives. He blamed himself for casualties caused by methods he helped develop. Daniel took personal responsibility for every failure, even though the experimental nature of the work meant that some unsuccessful attempts were inevitable. General Hayes confirmed. His psychological evaluation reports from that period show increasing signs of stress and guilt that normal counseling methods weren't addressing effectively. Maya absorbed this information while studying photographs that showed her father's expression evolving from confident determination to something that looked like haunted resignation. The progression was subtle but unmistakable, documenting the psychological transformation that had ultimately destroyed his ability to function in normal family relationships. His final deployment involved leading a team tasked with implementing the successful techniques he had helped develop, the general continued. The irony was that Daniel's innovative methods were saving lives throughout the theater of operations, but he remained focused on the earlier failures rather than the subsequent successes. The complexity of her father's psychological burden became clearer as Maya understood that his final military service had involved simultaneously experiencing professional triumph and personal torment. So he was successful militarily but unable to reconcile his role in the experimental failures. Exactly, General Hayes confirmed. Daniel Rodriguez was receiving commendations for techniques that were revolutionizing explosive ordnance disposal operations while privately carrying guilt about casualties that had occurred during the development process. Maya began to understand how such psychological complexity could have made her father's transition to civilian family life impossibly difficult. When he returned from his final deployment, he was carrying responsibility for both successes and failures that he couldn't explain to his family. The classified nature of his work meant that Daniel couldn't discuss the specific experiences that were affecting his psychological well-being, the general explained. Military counselors who weren't cleared for the program details couldn't provide effective treatment for problems they weren't allowed to understand completely. The bureaucratic barriers that had prevented her father from receiving appropriate mental health treatment added another layer of tragedy to Maya's understanding of his departure from their family. So he was struggling with classified trauma that no one was equipped to address. Daniel requested extended leave to address his psychological issues, but the experimental program was transitioning to operational implementation, and his expertise was considered essential for training other units in the new techniques, General Hayes revealed. The timing created a conflict between military necessity and personal welfare that wasn't resolved in his favor. Maya felt anger building as she realized that institutional priorities had prevented her father from getting help when he needed it most desperately. The military chose mission requirements over my father's mental health. The decision-making process was more complex than that, but yes, operational requirements took precedence over individual welfare in ways that I've regretted for over 20 years, the general admitted. Daniel completed his final deployment, despite clear signs that he was psychologically compromised, and his condition deteriorated significantly during that period. The admission of institutional failure from someone of General Hayes's rank provided Maya with validation for anger she had carried without understanding its source. What happened during his final deployment that made his condition worse? General Hayes hesitated before responding, his expression suggesting that the information he was about to share represented the most difficult aspect of her father's story. Daniel's team was responsible for clearing routes in an area where intelligence had identified a new type of explosive device that conventional detection methods couldn't locate reliably. Maya sensed that this part of her father's story would explain the final psychological break that had driven him away from military service and family life. Did his team encounter these new devices? Daniel personally detected and neutralized 17 sophisticated explosive devices during a single operation, saving dozens of lives but exposing himself to psychological stress that exceeded human endurance, the general revealed. The operation was considered a complete success militarily, but Daniel suffered what would now be recognized as severe psychological trauma. The image of her father performing extraordinarily dangerous work while psychologically fragile provided Maya with new understanding of the impossible circumstances that had shaped his final military experiences. He was operating at peak professional effectiveness while suffering internal breakdown. Daniel's technical abilities remained exceptional even while his psychological condition deteriorated, General Hayes confirmed. His final operation reports show innovative problem-solving and flawless execution of extremely dangerous procedures. But his personal communications reveal a man who had reached the limits of psychological endurance. Maya realized that her father's departure from military service and family life had occurred at the moment when his professional success and personal breakdown had reached crisis proportions simultaneously. So he left the army and his family because he couldn't continue functioning despite being at the peak of his technical abilities. Daniel Rodriguez disappeared from a military medical facility where he was undergoing evaluation for psychological treatment. General Hayes revealed. Quietly. He was never officially discharged, never formally separated from military service, and never located despite extensive search efforts. The revelation that her father had essentially vanished from military custody rather than completing normal separation procedures introduced possibilities that Maya had never considered about his current status and whereabouts. You mean he's technically still a soldier? Daniel Rodriguez remains listed as absent without leave pending investigation, a status that has never been resolved despite decades of periodic inquiry, the general confirmed. Finding you here, demonstrating abilities that mirror his exceptional technical skills, may provide the first meaningful lead in understanding what happened to one of the finest soldiers I ever commanded. The silence that followed General Hayes's revelation stretched between them like a chasm that had suddenly opened to reveal depths Maya had never imagined existed beneath her family's carefully constructed narrative. The office's air conditioning hummed steadily, providing a mechanical counterpoint to the weight of information that was reshaping her understanding of everything she had believed about her father's disappearance and her own identity. Maya stared at the photographs spread across the coffee table, images of her father in military uniform that now carried entirely different meaning than they had possessed just hours earlier. The confident young soldier in these pictures wasn't simply a man who had struggled with civilian readjustment, but someone whose exceptional abilities had led him into classified operations that had ultimately destroyed his capacity to function in normal family relationships. "Sir," Maya began, her voice barely above a whisper, "are you telling me that my father never legally left the military? That he's been considered a missing soldier for over 20 years?" General Hayes nodded gravely, his expression reflecting the weight of carrying this information for decades without the ability to provide answers to the family that had been left behind. Daniel Rodriguez's disappearance from the medical facility triggered investigations that continued for several years before being classified as cold cases. Periodic reviews have never yielded any substantial leads about his whereabouts or current status. The implications of this revelation began cascading through Maya's consciousness, raising questions about everything from her legal status as the daughter of a missing soldier to the possibility that her father might still be alive somewhere, carrying burdens too heavy to share with the family he had been forced to abandon. Does this mean there might be benefits or support available for my mother and me that we never knew existed? Maya asked, her practical mind grappling with immediate consequences, even as she processed the emotional complexity of learning her father's true circumstances. Your family's eligibility for various forms of military support has been complicated by Daniel's unclear status, the general explained. Missing and action classifications create bureaucratic situations that don't fit standard benefit categories, leaving families in legal limbo that the system isn't designed to address effectively. Maya felt a surge of anger at the institutional failures that had compounded her family's suffering, denying them support they might have received if her father's situation had been handled differently from the beginning. So we've been struggling financially for over 20 years, while my father's military service should have provided assistance that we never received. The situation is more complex than simple eligibility issues, General Hayes said carefully. Daniel's involvement in classified programs creates additional complications. regarding what information can be shared and what benefits can be accessed without compromising ongoing security considerations. The mention of ongoing security considerations suggested that her father's classified work continued to have implications decades after his disappearance, raising possibilities that Maya found both fascinating and disturbing. Are you saying that my father's experimental work is still classified because it's being used in current military operations? The techniques that Daniel helped develop became foundational elements of modern explosive ordnance disposal procedures. The general confirmed. His contributions are still saving lives in current operations, but the classified nature of the original development program prevents full disclosure of his role in creating these life-saving methods. Maya began to understand that her father's legacy included innovations that were protecting soldiers in contemporary conflicts, a contribution that provided some measure of meaning to the sacrifices that had ultimately destroyed his ability to maintain normal family relationships. So other families have fathers and sons and daughters who are alive today because of work my father did 20 years ago. Hundreds of lives, possibly thousands, General Hayes confirmed. Daniel Rodriguez's technical innovations fundamentally changed how military forces approach explosive threat detection and neutralization. His work represents one of the most significant contributions to soldier safety in modern military history. The magnitude of her father's professional achievements provided Maya with a sense of pride that was simultaneously uplifting and heartbreaking, knowing that such exceptional service had come at the cost of his psychological well-being and his relationship with his family. Why wasn't he honored publicly for contributions of such importance? The classified nature of the program prevented public recognition during Daniel's active service, and his subsequent disappearance made posthumous honors impossible without confirmation of his status, the general explained. Military bureaucracy doesn't handle exceptional cases well, particularly when they involve classified programs and missing personnel. Maya absorbed this information while studying the commendation certificates in her folder, awards that now seemed inadequate recognition for someone whose work had achieved such extraordinary impact on military operations and soldier safety. If my father's contributions were so significant, why hasn't the military made greater efforts to locate him? Over the years, General Hayes's expression darkened with what appeared to be personal regret and institutional frustration. Resources for locating missing veterans are limited, and Daniel's case was complicated by the classified nature of his work and the fact that he disappeared from a medical facility rather than during combat operations. The bureaucratic obstacles that had prevented comprehensive search efforts added another layer of systemic failure to Maya's growing understanding of how institutions had failed her father and her family. So the same classification that prevented him from getting appropriate psychological treatment also limited efforts to find him after he disappeared? Exactly, the general confirmed. The program's security requirements created barriers to sharing information that might have facilitated more effective search operations or provided better support for his family during his absence. Maya felt the weight of decades of institutional decisions that had prioritized bureaucratic convenience over human welfare, creating cascading consequences that had shaped her entire life without her knowledge or understanding. Sir, what changed that allowed you to share this information with me today? Finding you here, demonstrating the same extraordinary mechanical intuition that made your father legendary among combat engineers, provides potential new avenues for understanding what happened to him, General Hayes explained. Your abilities suggest possible genetic or learned connections to Daniel's technical expertise that might yield insights into his psychological state and potential whereabouts. The suggestion that her mechanical abilities might provide clues to her father's disappearance introduced possibilities that Maya had never considered. The idea that inherited or learned technical skills might somehow connect her to answers about his fate. Do you think my father might have continued working with mechanical systems after he disappeared? It's possible that Daniel's psychological need to withdraw from human relationships didn't extend to his relationship with mechanical systems, the general suggested. Someone with his level of technical expertise might have found work that allowed him to continue using those abilities while avoiding the interpersonal demands that he could no longer handle. Maya began to consider the possibility that her father might have spent the past 20 years working in isolation, using his exceptional abilities to support himself, while maintaining the emotional distance from family relationships that his psychological condition required. You think he might be alive and working somewhere as a mechanic or engineer. It's speculation, but your presence here suggests possibilities that I've never had reason to consider before, General Hayes admitted. The genetic component of technical aptitude, combined with the specific ways you approach mechanical problems, might provide insights into where someone with Daniel's abilities and psychological limitations might have found refuge. The idea that her own career path might mirror choices her father had made introduced both hope and uncertainty about whether such parallels might eventually lead to contact with a man who had become a stranger to his own family. Are you suggesting that my mechanical work might somehow bring me into contact with my father? I'm suggesting that we now have avenues for investigation that didn't exist before, the general replied carefully. Your abilities and career choices provide new data points that might help narrow the search parameters for someone whose psychological profile and technical capabilities we understand better now than we did 20 years ago. Maya felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension at the possibility that her father might be locatable after decades of absence, combined with uncertainty about whether contact would be beneficial for either of them given the psychological issues that had driven his original departure. What would happen if we actually found him? Would he face legal consequences for being absent without leave for over 20 years? Daniel's psychological condition at the time of his disappearance, combined with the institutional failures that contributed to his situation, would likely result in medical discharge rather than disciplinary action, General Hayes explained. The military's understanding of psychological trauma has evolved significantly since Daniel's active service period. The possibility that her father might receive appropriate medical care and legal resolution of his military status provided Maya with hope that contact might lead to healing rather than additional complications. So finding him might actually help resolve the problems that caused him to leave in the first place. Modern treatment methods for combat-related psychological trauma are far more effective than what was available during Daniel's service, the general confirmed. Veterans who couldn't be helped 20 years ago are successfully receiving treatment and rebuilding their lives with current therapeutic approaches. Maya began to envision possibilities for family reunion that went beyond simple contact to include genuine healing and restoration of relationships that had been severed by circumstances beyond anyone's control at the time. Would you be willing to help search for my father using this new information? Miss Rodriguez, I've been unofficially searching for Daniel Rodriguez for over 20 years, General Hayes revealed. Finding you here today provides the first meaningful lead I've encountered in decades of periodic investigation. The revelation that her father's former commanding officer had maintained personal interest in his welfare for decades provided Maya with understanding that military leadership could extend far beyond official duties to include genuine care for individual soldiers. You've been looking for him all this time? Daniel Rodriguez was an exceptional soldier whose disappearance represented both personal loss and institutional failure that I've never fully accepted, the general explained. Your presence here suggests that we may finally have the information necessary to resolve questions that have haunted me throughout my entire subsequent career. Maya felt overwhelmed by the convergence of circumstances that had brought her face to face with someone who had known her father during his finest professional moments and who possessed both the motivation and resources necessary to pursue answers that had eluded decades of previous investigation. What happens next, sir? General Hayes leaned forward, his expression reflecting determination that suggested military training applied to personal mission objectives. We begin a systematic investigation using your career history, mechanical specializations, and geographic movements as starting points for identifying areas where someone with Daniel's abilities might have found work and refuge. The prospect of actively searching for her father using sophisticated investigative resources represented a dramatic shift from the passive acceptance of his absence that had characterized Maya's entire life. You really think we might find him? Miss Rodriguez, 24 hours ago, I would have said that Daniel Rodriguez would never be found because he had successfully erased his identity and hidden himself beyond discovery. The general replied, Today, watching you demonstrate abilities that mirror his legendary technical skills, I believe we may have found the key to solving a mystery that has defied resolution for over 2 decades. As Maya prepared to leave General Hayes's office, carrying more information about her father than she had possessed in her entire previous life, she realized that her simple contract to repair a tank engine had initiated a chain of events that might ultimately reunite her with a father whose absence had shaped every aspect of her identity and whose presence might finally provide answers to questions she had carried since childhood. The investigation that followed General Hayes's revelation unfolded with the systematic thoroughness that characterized military operations, but also with the personal urgency of 2 people determined to solve a mystery that had shaped both their lives in profound ways. Maya found herself granted extended leave from her contract duties, her time now devoted to working alongside military investigators who brought decades of experience in locating missing personnel to bear on her father's case. The search began, with Maya's own career history, mapping the geographic progression of her mechanical work from small New Mexico farms to automotive shops throughout the Southwest and finally to military contract positions across multiple states. Investigators theorized that if Daniel Rodriguez had continued working with mechanical systems after his disappearance, his career path might parallel the choices his daughter had made, driven by similar psychological needs and technical abilities. Database searches revealed hundreds of civilian mechanics and engineers whose work histories showed exceptional diagnostic abilities and innovative repair solutions. But cross-referencing these individuals against physical descriptions and approximate ages gradually narrowed the possibilities to a manageable number of candidates for further investigation. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered employment records for a maintenance worker at a remote mining operation in northern Arizona. Someone who had been hired under minimal documentation requirements and whose technical innovations had become legendary among equipment operators despite his apparent preference for working alone and avoiding supervisory positions. David Rivers had been employed at the Copper Canyon Mining Company for 18 years, maintaining complex earth-moving equipment and mineral processing machinery with diagnostic abilities that mine supervisors described as almost supernatural. His personnel file contained minimal personal information, but his work history showed the kind of innovative problem-solving that had characterized Daniel Rodriguez's military service. Maya's heart raced as she studied surveillance photographs that investigators had obtained from the mining company's security system. The man in these images bore striking resemblance to her father, aged by nearly 2 decades, but still recognizable in the careful way he approached mechanical problems and the solitary manner that had allowed him to maintain emotional distance from coworkers. General Hayes arranged for a discreet reconnaissance mission to the mining facility, using his military connections to ensure that initial contact would be handled with sensitivity appropriate for someone whose psychological condition remained unknown after decades of isolation. Maya insisted on participating in this mission, despite warnings about the emotional risks of confronting a father who might not be capable of normal family relationships. The copper mine sat in a landscape of stunning desolation, surrounded by Arizona desert that stretched endlessly toward distant mountains. The facility operated around the clock, its massive machinery creating a constant background noise that provided perfect cover for someone who preferred anonymity and predictable routine to the complexities of interpersonal relationships. Maya's first glimpse of the man who might be her father came as he worked alone in a maintenance bay, his movements displaying the same methodical approach to mechanical problems that she recognized in her own diagnostic techniques. Even from a distance, watching through binoculars from a concealment position, she could see the family resemblance that 22 years of separation hadn't erased. The plan for initial contact required a delicate balance between confirming the man's identity and avoiding psychological shock that might cause him to flee again if he had indeed spent decades hiding from his past. General Hayes had arranged for Maya to approach as a visiting technical consultant, a role that would allow natural conversation about mechanical work without immediately revealing the personal connections that had brought her to this remote location. Maya's hands trembled as she walked into the maintenance facility, where David Rivers was working on a massive excavator engine, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear about what this encounter might reveal. The man looked up as she approached, his eyes showing the cautious wariness of someone accustomed to avoiding unnecessary social interaction. "Excuse me," Maya began, her voice carefully controlled despite the emotional chaos she was experiencing. "I'm Maya Rodriguez, a contractor consulting on equipment optimization. I've heard you have exceptional diagnostic abilities with complex machinery." The effect of her name on the man was immediate and unmistakable. David Rivers froze completely, his face cycling through recognition, shock, and something that looked like terror before settling into the kind of emotional shutdown that suggested psychological defenses developed through years of avoiding painful memories. "Rodriguez," he repeated slowly, his voice carrying the same careful cadence that Maya remembered from her earliest childhood. "You wouldn't happen to be related to Carmen Rodriguez from Espanola, New Mexico?" Maya felt tears beginning to form as she realized that this man was indeed her father, that 2 decades of searching and wondering were about to end in a maintenance bay surrounded by the industrial machinery that had provided him refuge from psychological wounds too deep to heal through normal family relationships. "Carmen Rodriguez is my mother," Maya confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. "And if you're the man I think you are, you're Daniel Rivera Rodriguez, combat engineer, 82nd Airborne Division, and my father who disappeared when I was 3 years old." The man who had been calling himself David Rivers sank slowly onto a nearby equipment crate, his composure cracking to reveal the emotional devastation that 20 years of isolation hadn't healed. "Maya," he said, her name carrying decades of suppressed love and regret, "you were so small when I left. I never thought I'd see you again." Maya moved closer, studying the face that had aged and weathered, but still carried traces of the confident young soldier she had seen in her mother's photographs. "Dad, we've been looking for you. General Hayes has been searching for you for 20 years. We understand now what happened, why you felt you had to leave." Daniel's mention of General Hayes triggered visible emotional response, suggesting that his memories of military service remained vivid despite his efforts to escape that part of his life. "Robert Hayes was the finest commanding officer I ever served under. Is he well?" "He's the one who helped me find you," Maya explained. "When he saw me working on a tank engine at Nellis Air Force Base, he recognized abilities that he said were identical to yours. That's how we figured out that you might still be working with mechanical systems." The revelation that his technical abilities had provided the key to his discovery brought the faintest smile to Daniel's weathered features. "I couldn't stop working with machines. They were the only relationships I could maintain without causing harm." Maya understood intuitively that her father's psychological wounds had made human connections unbearably painful while leaving his mechanical intuition intact, creating the isolation that had allowed him to survive while denying him the family. Relationships that might have provided healing. Dad, medical treatment for combat trauma has advanced significantly since you disappeared, Maya said gently. Veterans who couldn't be helped 20 years ago are successfully receiving treatment now. General Hayes thinks you could get the help you needed, but couldn't access during your service. Daniel's expression showed the first glimmer of hope Maya had seen since revealing her identity. I've thought about getting help countless times over the years, but I was afraid that making contact with anyone from my past would bring pain to people who deserved better than what I could offer. Maya felt her heart breaking for the man who had sacrificed his family relationships to protect them from psychological damage he feared he might cause. Dad, leaving us caused more pain than staying and struggling together ever could have. Mom has never remarried, never stopped wondering if you were alive and safe somewhere. The mention of Carmen brought visible emotion to Daniel's face, love and regret intertwining in expressions that revealed how deeply he had missed the family he had felt compelled to abandon. How is she? Has she been able to build a good life without the burden of my problems? She's strong and she's managed, but she's never stopped loving you or hoping that someday you might come home, Maya replied honestly. Finding you doesn't mean everything will be simple, but it means we can face whatever challenges exist as a family instead of carrying them alone. Daniel stood slowly, moving toward Maya with hesitant steps that suggested he was testing his emotional capacity for physical connection after decades of isolation. When he finally embraced his daughter, 22 years of separation seemed to collapse into a moment of pure recognition and love that transcended the psychological barriers that had kept them apart. I want to come home, Daniel whispered, his voice breaking with emotion that had been suppressed for 2 decades. I want to try to heal and learn how to be part of a family again. General Hayes, who had been monitoring the situation from a discreet distance, approached the reunion with the satisfied expression of someone whose decades-long mission had finally reached successful completion. His presence provided both moral support and practical assistance for the complex process of reintegrating a missing veteran into military and civilian systems that had evolved significantly during his absence. The journey back to New Mexico became a pilgrimage of healing that brought together 3 people whose lives had been shaped by circumstances beyond their control, but who now had the opportunity to choose connection over separation, hope over resignation. Carmen's tears when she saw her husband for the first time in 22 years provided the emotional foundation for rebuilding relationships that trauma had fractured, but love had preserved. Maya's mechanical abilities, which had always seemed like mysterious gifts, now revealed themselves as inherited talents that connected her to a family legacy of technical innovation and problem-solving that spanned generations. Her work had not only led to finding her father, but it also provided the bridge that made their reunion possible. If this story of extraordinary reunion against impossible odds has touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join our community of people who believe that some connections transcend time, distance, and circumstance. Your support allows us to continue sharing these remarkable stories of human resilience and the mysterious ways that families find their way back to each other. Have you ever experienced a moment when your talents or career choices led to unexpected discoveries about your family history? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire our next video about the incredible ways that our abilities and choices can reveal hidden connections to our past. Tomorrow, we'll be sharing an even more extraordinary story about a military nurse who discovered that the veteran she had been treating for months was actually the brother she had believed died in combat 20 years earlier. These stories remind us that sometimes the people we're meant to find are hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment and the right circumstances to reveal connections that seemed lost forever. Until next time, remember that every skill you develop, every career path you choose, And every act of service you perform might be the key that unlocks mysteries you never knew existed. Sometimes the most powerful reunions happen not through deliberate searching, but through simply being. True to the abilities and calling that make you who you are.